The nurse on the night shift had seen enough newborns to trust her instincts. She moved through the ward the same way she always did at 2 in the morning, quiet and efficient, checking charts, adjusting blankets, noting color and breathing. She reached the bassinet at the far end of the room, looked down, and stopped. The baby was awake, not crying, not fussing. Awake the way people are when they are thinking about something important. The infant's eyes tracked the ceiling above him with a steadiness she had never seen in a child 3 days old. She waved her hand slowly across his field of vision. His gaze followed it with a precision that made the small hairs on her arms prickle without quite telling her why. She stood there longer than her routine required. Then she made a note that the infant's color and vitals were excellent and left the room. She did not put down what she had actually seen. She would not have found the right words for it. The child lay still in the dark after her footsteps faded down the corridor. His breathing was measured. His expression, had any adult been there to read it, was not the confused blankness of a newborn but something older, something patient. His name would be Lin Zichin, though his parents had not yet written it anywhere official. The man living behind those eyes was already forming a plan. He had died in another life. He was certain of it, though the specifics had gone blurred at the edges the way things do when carried across that kind of distance. What remained fully intact was his mind, his reasoning, his adult judgment, his ability to measure a problem and begin working on it. And the problem he faced was considerable. He was trapped in a body that could not yet roll over without help, in a world he did not recognize, and he had no way to know yet whether that world was more or less dangerous than the one he had left. He found out in his first week. His parents kept the family room television running through the afternoons, and Lin could hear it from the bassinet. The news anchor spoke with the practiced calm of someone for whom catastrophe had become routine. An aberrant beast sighting in a northern district. Classification: Advanced Tier 4. The local cyborg unit had responded in 9 minutes. Casualties: 7. The creature had been confirmed destroyed. The camera cut to the aftermath. 3 buildings reduced to rubble, emergency vehicles clustered in the street, and in the middle of it, a woman with metal, where her left arm used to be, calmly holding it disconnected at the shoulder socket, while a technician knelt beside her to reattach it. Lin lay on his back and processed this with the full capacity of a grown adult mind. Monsters. Real, building-sized, people-killing monsters. A society that had built an entire infrastructure around surviving them. 2 paths to power that the human population had developed: mechanical augmentation, becoming a cyborg, or biological merger, fusing human genetics with beast DNA. He was a newborn without access to either. The system appeared that same evening. No introduction, no explanation of origin. A soft notification appeared in his vision, visible only to him, and outlined its mechanics directly. Every physical action he performed repeatedly would permanently strengthen the corresponding attribute. Kicks built leg strength. Crawling reinforced core stability. Gripping, lifting, striking, moving, reading, studying, all of it fed back into measurable growth. The system generated points from training, points converted into advances in strength, vitality, dexterity, and proficiency. He could rank up! He could evolve. He could grow into something this world could not so easily destroy. He kicked his feet against the bassinet mattress. The counter at the edge of his vision moved. He did it again. The nurse checking on him at 2 in the morning found the infant lying still with closed eyes, and even breathing. She moved on. Behind those closed eyes, he was already planning the next session. That pattern became the architecture of his early years. Adults present, stillness, the performance of infancy. Adults absent, work. He trained in the dark hours, in the gaps between check-ins, during naps he never actually took. He was patient the way adults are patient, understanding that compound interest only pays out over time, that every hour spent now was an hour the monsters could not find him unprepared later. The television continued to educate him. Documentaries, educational programming, news segments. He absorbed all of it and assembled a picture of this world, piece by piece. 6 biological ranks, each with 9 tiers. Ordinary at the bottom, mythical at heights so rare that a creature of that rank had not been confirmed in over 60 years. Humans at their natural baseline occupied the lowest positions. Modified humans, those who had survived cyborg procedures or gene fusion, could rise considerably higher. The strongest became national celebrities. The country tracked their progress the way old societies had tracked sports stars. That detail mattered. It meant the world was already watching for exceptional children. It meant that if he performed at the level of a genuine prodigy rather than an impossibility, no one would investigate him. Gifted children existed. The country celebrated them. He would become one. He practiced restraint, the way he practiced everything else, deliberately. His father, Lin Yan, was the easier variable. Warm and proud, he interpreted every remarkable thing his son did as evidence that he had produced a truly special child. When the infant's grip closed around his offered finger, with surprising force, he winced, then laughed, then told the story with embellishments at dinner. Lin had already loosened his hold before the wince fully registered. His mother was different. Zhang Wangxin paid close attention. She was affectionate and trusting, but she had sharp eyes and a habit of standing in doorways a moment longer than strictly necessary. Lin was 11 months old when she opened the door during a training session and caught him mid-push-up in the crib. He had perhaps half a second. He dropped sideways and produced the expression of a baby who had accidentally rolled over. She stood in the doorway and looked at him. Then she came and fixed his blanket and stood there a moment before she left. He resolved to keep upper body training to late-night hours only. By age 2, he was walking, and every step was a calculation. He set his coordination slightly above what normal toddlers managed, not remarkably above. He modulated his grip to perhaps a sixth of actual capacity during family interactions, because his actual grip could have bent a standard door handle, and that kind of thing produced questions. His mother took him to the pediatrician for a routine check. The doctor noted his muscle tone was exceptional for his age, and looked at both parents with a raised eyebrow. His mother beamed. Lin sat on the examination table and kept his posture deliberately soft. The library trip at age 3 was the first close call. His mother left him in the children's section with a clear view of the picture books and turned to browse nearby. He moved through the children's section in about 40 seconds, found nothing he had not already surpassed, and walked into the reference area. She found him 20 minutes later, cross-legged on the floor, with a thick biology text open across his small legs, pages turning steadily. She told herself he liked the pictures. He was reading a research summary on the documented mechanics of biological rank advancement through gene fusion, with appended case studies from 3 provincial centers. His system had flagged a reading quest early on. 100 million characters consumed, a number that sounded impossible and was, for a child, and he was working through it anyway. The family bookshelf emptied. He worked through his father's professional texts, the library's reference materials, news archives on the family terminal. No one connected his reading speed to anything unusual. They connected it to pride. Kindergarten arrived at age 5. Bright classrooms, the smell of crayons, 20 children who had never been asked to think about anything more dangerous than falling off a bike. Lin took his seat, answered questions at a pace slightly ahead of average, ran during athletics at speeds that impressed without causing alarm, and observed. He met Shen Qinghan on the second day. She lived in the same residential block and had apparently already decided they were going to be friends, without consulting him. She appeared beside him at the water fountain without introduction. She sat next to him at lunch that day and the day after, as though it were simply her assigned seat. She had dark braids, a gap in her front teeth where the adult ones were taking their time arriving, and a laugh that showed up reliably before whatever had produced it. She followed him to the library corner. She tugged his sleeve toward whatever interested her, which was most things. He had spent 4 years performing ordinary for an audience of adults who loved him but could never truly know him. Shen required nothing from him except to exist near her. He found this arrangement more comfortable than he had expected. She was curious about the world and asked questions he occasionally found worth thinking about. She made silence feel like something rather than nothing. Within a month, they walked to school together each morning, and the friendship had stopped needing to be decided. The first serious trouble came 6 weeks in. 3 boys from the grade above had identified Shen as someone unlikely to push back. They took her lunch tray. She demanded it back. They laughed. Lin set down his own tray, crossed the room, and stood between her and them. They were bigger. They told him to leave. The closest one reached past him toward the tray. Lin caught that wrist. He used approximately a tenth of his actual capability. Even a tenth was enough to freeze the boy completely, his face shifting through surprise, and then something far less comfortable. Lin held on for exactly the number of seconds required to make the message unmistakable, then released. He suggested in the mildest available tone that they return the tray. They did, quickly. They never came near Shen again. The system logged the event and registered progress toward the Kindergarten Kid King title. Shen asked how he had done that. He said he had just held on tight. She accepted this, retrieved her lunch tray, and returned to eating. The reading quest completed 3 months before kindergarten ended. 100 million characters, and with that milestone came the celestial root of wisdom, settling into him in a single quiet moment, a notification, and then the felt reality of something shifting behind his eyes permanently. Perfect memory. Learning speed that compressed what should take weeks into single careful sessions. He had already been absorbing information faster than anyone around him. The gap now became something else entirely. He tested it alone in the music room, with a printed instruction sheet and a flute he had never touched. By the end of the hour, he could play a clean melody. He put it down and left. Nobody needed to see that. The Kindergarten Kid King title completed the week before graduation. The permanent ability it granted was modest, a baseline enhancement to his reaction time. He did not dismiss it. Each step compounded. He understood this, the way a craftsman understands foundations. The early layers were not impressive, but everything afterward would depend on them. Elementary school was larger and louder. He won his first academic competition 8 weeks in. He calibrated the margin carefully, impressive without being inexplicable. He won the second competition 6 weeks later. Teachers began watching him with the particular expressions of people composing anecdotes. Shen Qinghan sat beside him every day. She struggled most with mathematics. He began walking her through problems at lunch, not teaching so much as removing the specific obstacles each one placed in her way. She climbed into the class top 10 by the end of their second year. The afternoon the rankings posted, she grabbed his arm in the corridor and shook it enthusiastically. He told her she had done the work herself. She had. Athletic records fell carefully, one at a time, each spaced enough apart to read as a growth spurt or a lucky day. He ran. He jumped. He kept his performance human. The news kept delivering warnings he was the only one treating seriously. A report about cities in 3 northern provinces sustaining what the anchor called coordinated beast access events. The rat god cult mentioned by name for the second time that month. Humans who cooperated with aberrant beasts, who moved like an organization with specific goals, rather than scattered criminals. Lin watched the segment and felt the specific cold clarity of someone who understands that the danger is moving toward them and cannot yet be stopped. He needed to be stronger than what was coming. He was nowhere near it yet. Bai Shuer arrived at the start of his 3rd elementary year. The transfer notice was entirely ordinary. The girl who walked into the classroom was not. She was slight and quiet, with dark hair kept forward across her face. Lin noticed her the moment she came through the door, though what he noticed would have been invisible to anyone else. A faint trace of aberrant biology, the kind of biological signature he had learned to identify from research, and from the beast materials he had been studying. Not a monster, but not entirely an unmodified human either. He filed the observation without showing it on his face. He watched her through the first week without approaching. She ate alone. She sat at the edges of group exercises. She had arrived already certain she would not be welcome, and she carried that certainty in the way she held herself, already angled away before anyone said anything unkind. Then the smell intensified slightly. She was secreting something biological, a faint organic odor. The class noticed it without understanding its source. Children are efficient with cruelty toward things they identify as other, and the efficiency here was unremarkable. Chair slides away from her, whispered names, a piece of paper thrown at her back during quiet reading time. She flinched and said nothing. Lin gave it 2 days, calculating whether his involvement would help or make it worse. On the 3rd day, he walked to her table at lunch and sat across from her. Shen Qinghan appeared a step behind him, settled into the seat on Bai's left, and began unwrapping her food with the ease of someone sitting at her usual table. Bai looked at them both. Shen held out a piece of fruit and explained that her mother always packed too much. The silence that followed was the kind that had a chance of becoming something. Over the following days, the friendship found its shape around Shen's stubborn warmth and Lin's willingness to stay present without requiring anything from Bai in return. She began to speak, She told them one afternoon that she had never stayed anywhere long enough to keep a friend, that she had always been transferred. She said it without drama, which made it land harder than drama would have. Shen held her hand across the table and told her they were going to be different. The confrontation with the lead bully was brief. Lin intercepted her in the hallway, said something in a low voice, and held her gaze for long enough that she became acutely aware she could not measure the person looking at her. The next morning, the girl apologized to Bai in front of everyone present and cleaned the mess she had made of Bai's things without needing to be told twice. Bai gave them necklaces the following week. Beast Fang, she said, reaching into her bag and producing 2 more. Lin took his and turned it over. The biological material was genuine, dense, with a faint residue of life essence inside, more than he had detected in the insects he had casually tested months earlier. He noted this without letting anything surface in his expression. He told her it was beautiful. He meant it. A Monday came, and her desk was empty. The transfer notice had gone through overnight. No farewell. Shen sat beside the empty chair through the entire first period without speaking, and Lin stayed close through the rest of the day without making her talk about it. He had suspected something like this before it happened. The smell, the secrecy, the pattern of constant transfers. Someone was moving her. Protecting her or controlling her, he could not yet determine. He cataloged the question in the section of his mind reserved for problems he could not solve without more information. He turned the Beast Fang necklace over in his fingers during the final period. He thought about the faint life essence it carried. He thought about Shen's face when she had looked at the empty chair. He turned back to the blackboard and paid attention to the lesson, because there was nothing useful he could do about either of those things today. Outside, a news broadcast was covering the remains of a coastal city where a beast classified as Rare Tier 6 had walked through a coastal barrier wall like it was made of paper. Lin did not hear it directly, but the world he was living in was moving, and he could feel the movement even from the distance of a quiet classroom in Shanghai. He had a long way to go. The news over the following months made that long way feel longer. Cities were the new unit of disaster. Not neighborhoods, not blocks, cities. A report out of a coastal province showed security footage of what the broadcast called an advanced Tier 7 entity moving through a residential district at 4 in the morning, the streetlights catching its shape for 3 seconds before the footage cut. The anchor noted 17 casualties and a response time of 14 minutes. 14 minutes was apparently considered acceptable. 2 weeks later, a coordinated event in the central provinces. Dozens of aberrant creatures appearing simultaneously across 4 districts. Contained by the military, but the word coordinated sat in Lin's mind afterward. Aberrant beasts did not coordinate on their own. Something was directing them. The rat god cult was named in the same broadcast. The anchor described it as a domestic threat organization operating across multiple provinces. Investigators believe the group was actively facilitating beast access into civilian areas. The footage cut to a government press briefing, a spokesman reading prepared remarks, and behind him on the display screen, a grainy photograph recovered from a cult compound in a southeastern province. What was in the photograph had started as a human being. The rat DNA layered over it had buried that origin almost entirely. Humans who had chosen to stop being human, who had chosen the beasts. Lin sat with that information for a long time. He thought about what a person would need to believe to make that choice. He arrived at the same answer he always arrived at. They had decided the world was going to consume them either way, and at least this path gave them teeth. He understood the fear. He had lived with a version of it since the day he heard his first news broadcast from a bassinet. The difference between him and the cult members was that he had found another road. He needed to walk it faster. He was 9 years old, at the end of his 4th elementary year, and his physical baseline had crossed into territory that would have startled any clinician who examined him honestly. He could flip a small car if he needed to. He was fast enough to leave most adults behind in a flat sprint, if he let himself go. He did not let himself go. He kept the ceiling in place, performing slightly above the top of the human child range, never shattering it. The kidnapping attempt happened on a Thursday afternoon in early autumn. He and Shen were walking the shortcut home, a 6-minute saving that cut through a street with less pedestrian traffic. He noticed the woman near the corner where the route turned toward the residential blocks. She was standing with her arms loose at her sides and her gaze directed at the passing street, dressed like someone with no particular place to be. What she looked like and what she actually was did not match. Her body was entirely focused on them. Red hair, late 30s, heavier build than her posture suggested. Hands not quite relaxed, he kept talking to Shen about whatever they had been discussing, and felt rather than heard the second person closing in from behind. The woman moved first, stepping toward Shen with one hand extended. A vehicle at the curb opened its rear door. Lin had already stopped walking. He let the woman commit to her reach, then moved to intercept her wrist and redirect her momentum sideways into the low wall behind them. Controlled force, enough to remove her from the equation without causing serious injury. The man behind reached him. Lin dropped low beneath the grab, used the man's forward weight against him, and put him face down on the pavement. 4 seconds, perhaps 5. He stood between Shen and both of them and assessed. Shen was still. She was gripping the strap of her school bag with both hands and breathing fast, but she had not panicked. He had 3 seconds before whoever was in the vehicle made a decision. The drain cover behind the vehicle lifted and fell aside. The sound it made was not a sound he had heard before. A heavy, wet scraping, something large moving through confined space and then emerging. What came up from the drain was the size of a horse. Gray-black matted fur, eyes that caught the afternoon light and reflected it back wrong. Too bright, too focused. The awareness in them was something he had read about and not yet encountered directly. Giant mutant rat, the strain from the northern province reports. It came up fast and it oriented on movement. The red-haired woman was pushing herself upright. The creature's attention fixed on her with a precision that removed any doubt about its intelligence level. Lin grabbed Shen's arm and moved, putting distance between them and the drain in the 3 seconds the creature spent selecting its target. He heard the sound of impact behind him but did not look back. He had Shen moving, and he needed her moving faster. The screaming was brief. He did not slow until they reached a section of street with other people. Shen was shaking, her breathing shallow, and he kept a hand on her shoulder and maintained their pace at the level of 2 people walking quickly rather than running, because running attracted attention, and he needed a moment before questions started. The cyborg arrived 11 minutes after they reached the main street. A response unit officer he recognized from news broadcasts, the reinforced plating on her left side catching the afternoon light as she moved at speed toward the side street. There was a sustained metallic impact, then silence. 3 minutes after that, emergency vehicles. The police officer who reached them was young and professionally calm. He asked for their accounts. Shen described what she had experienced. The woman approaching, then movement. Then Lin had pulled her away, and they had run. Lin described the 2 adults on the ground, and the drain cover and the creature's direction. He told the officer he had pushed the woman when she grabbed at Shen's arm, which was true in the way that carefully selected facts are true. The man Lin had put on the pavement had a broken wrist. This produced a police captain. He came by the family home twice within the following week. A wide man in his late 40s, unhurried and methodical, with a face that had absorbed most varieties of surprise and remained level. He looked at Lin with the specific attention of someone who could not make the numbers add up. A child had incapacitated a trained adult. The child appeared cooperative, calm, and showed no anxiety when asked to re-explain the sequence of events. Lin explained that he had moved fast and gotten lucky. The captain wrote something in his notebook. The second visit, he brought a diagram of the street layout. Lin walked through the sequence again, accurate about everything except the force he had used. The captain thanked him politely and left. Lin watched the car from the window and noted the captain had not looked satisfied. He filed it in the section of his mind reserved for slow-burning complications and returned to training. The hostage situation at the shopping center happened 2 months later. A man with a weapon and a held clerk. 40 minutes of police at the perimeter cycling through negotiation phrases, while the geometry of the situation prevented any clean response. Lin had come through with his mother to pick up school supplies and had stayed after she moved to another section of the building. He studied the angle of the weapon for a minute. Then, too, he identified a trajectory. He found a piece of broken pavement at the curbing seam, the size of a large coin. He threw it from the crowd. It deflected off the man's forearm at the calculated angle. The weapon shifted 2 degrees. The police had their window. The hostage was pulled clear. The man was subdued inside 4 seconds. Lin walked his hands back into his jacket pockets and watched it resolve. He went home. He thought it through. He went back the next morning and found the officer's report, which had noted an unidentified projectile. The reward posted 2 days later. Civilian assistance, substantial amount. He sat with the exposure calculation for a full day before deciding. He went to the station and explained that he had thrown a piece of pavement by instinct, that he was not sure it had helped, that he had not meant to interfere. This was partly true. The officer looked at the trajectory he described and at the boy describing it, and his expression moved through several stages. The reward covered 3 months of Beast Materials budget. The arrested man mutated 2 days into custody. Lin heard it from the television. A suspect in a kidnapping case had undergone spontaneous biological transformation in his holding cell. Rat god cult involvement was suspected. A female officer with grade 3 augmentation had contained the incident. The footage showed the aftermath, a cell block that looked like the inside of something the creature had been trying to escape. Lin thought immediately about residual essence. He walked the station route the following morning, close enough to sense the biological signature without entering the facility. Faint, but real. The system registered the Rat King essence and opened the giant mutant rat guidebook entry, partially filled. He absorbed what he could and continued walking. The police captain was standing outside with a coffee. Their eyes met across the parking lot. Lin nodded politely and kept his pace unchanged. He could feel the captain watching his back for the full length of the block. The man had been standing there for several minutes before Lin arrived. Lin was certain of this without needing to confirm it. Elementary school ended that spring. His mother filmed the graduation ceremony from 3 angles. His father stood beside her and winked at Lin over her head when she started crying during the final address. Lin sat in the row of graduating students and watched his parents and thought, not for the first time, about the particular good fortune of being born into a family that looked like this one. He had given Shen the hairpin a month earlier. He had carved it himself from a section of hardwood he found in the building storage room. 3 evenings of work with a basic blade, smoothing the grain until the shape held and the surface sat right under his thumb. She had looked at it for a long moment before putting it in. She wore it through the rest of the week without asking where it came from. He did not explain. She did not need him to. The elementary school top dog title had completed 3 weeks before graduation. The permanent endurance enhancement it granted was more substantial than the kindergarten reward. His biological tier advanced. His body was building toward something that would have seemed like mythology to most people in his world. It still was not enough. He needed to think seriously about money. And the path to money went through the martial arts team at the middle school he was about to enter. He had already confirmed tournament prize structures. He had already begun calculating what he would need per month to maintain a meaningful Beast Materials budget. Middle school was a larger building with a competitive enrollment. Lin had made sure Shen's scores were sufficient over 3 years of study sessions. They walked in together on the first day. The social establishing happened on the second afternoon. 4 older students, upper year, leaning in the corridor that led to the athletic facilities. They made remarks as Lin and Shen passed. Lin kept walking. The remarks continued. One stepped into his path and told him new students should understand who the school belonged to. Lin said he understood completely. There was a badminton court visible through the athletic facility glass. He went in, picked up a racket someone had left on the bench, and sent a shuttle across the net at full speed, landing it in the back corner tight to both lines. He did it twice more, different corners, the same sharp sound each time. He set the racket down. He asked the senior if anything else needed to be established. All 4 of them left without speaking. The hallway was considerably quieter when he and Shen walked on through it. The middle school overlord title began accumulating progress steadily through his first term. Academic competitions he approached with calibrated margins. Physical benchmarks he kept carefully below their real ceiling. The badminton court he used more openly after Coach Guo, the martial arts instructor, saw the corridor incident through the athletic facility window and came looking for him 2 days later. The Survival of the Fittest title unlocked on a Tuesday evening while he was working through mathematics homework. He put his pen down. He read the notification carefully. The title granted the ability to absorb life essence from powerful organisms, beast materials, corpse residue, biological samples from higher-ranked creatures. Each absorbed species opened a guidebook entry. Filling the entry required repeated absorption. Completed guidebooks unlocked biological abilities specific to that creature's lineage. The abyssal giant butterfly entry opened. The giant mutant rat entry expanded. The ghost shadow squid appeared as a new entry, sitting at 0. He held the beast fang necklace Bai had given him, the one he had kept even after absorbing everything useful from it, turning it over in his fingers. He felt for the residue. Almost nothing left. He absorbed the last trace of it anyway. The butterfly guidebook moved a single small increment. He put it back around his neck. The problem now was supply. He ran controlled tests that weekend. Ordinary insects. The system acknowledged the attempts and returned values so close to nothing that the decimal was barely relevant. Small organisms were a dead end. He needed large, high-ranked beasts, fresh material, because degradation after death erased most of the usable essence. The chain was clear. The bottleneck was raw material. Raw material was expensive. Coach Guo found him in the athletic corridor 2 days after the survival title unlocked and asked whether he had considered the martial arts team. Lin had considered it from his first week. He told the coach he had some interest. The coach handed him an introductory pamphlet. Lin read it once, in the 30 seconds he held it before their first session. By the end of that session, he had reproduced every technique in the pamphlet with correct alignment, controlled power, and the specific spacing between movements that takes most students weeks to internalize. Coach Guo had watched the last 4 repetitions without speaking. Then he asked Lin how long he had been training. Lin said he had always been active. The coach scheduled him for a second session the same week. He was overheard telling a senior team member that he had found something he did not quite know how to classify yet. He said it under his breath. Lin heard it from across the room and made a note. Coach Guo's backing meant tournament access, travel allowances, prize money structures. All of that was useful in a way that the man's admiration alone was not. He purchased Ghost Shadow squid meat from a specialty market 3 train stops from home, using a portion of the hostage reward. Advanced Tier 3 biological density. He brought it home packed in cold storage and ate a portion that evening. The guidebook moved before he finished. He put down his chopsticks and revised every estimate he had been working with. Eating beast meat transferred essence directly, efficiently, better than corpse absorption at distance. The implication was that a consistent diet of high-ranked beast protein would advance his guidebooks at a pace that made the distance to completion actually calculable. He ran the numbers. He needed considerably more income than the reward had provided. The Kyoto prodigy appeared on national news that same week. The broadcast was the kind of segment the country ran every few months. A gifted child with confirmed gene fusion results, measured and profiled, their biological tier and projected advancement arc displayed as though the audience might care about the decimal points. The Kyoto boy was 13, a year older than Lin. His measured statistics were impressive enough that the broadcaster used the word unprecedented twice. Lin watched the segment with his dinner and compared. His own raw physical numbers, the ones he had never reported to anyone, sat above the Kyoto prodigy's published figures in every category. Not by a small amount. The prodigy had gene fusion advantages Lin did not, but the gap in base physical capability was already wide enough to be interesting. He noted it and moved on. The Kyoto prodigy was a measuring stick. He had always been going to surpass that stick. The only question was how quickly the rest of the world would need to know about it. Then the report that followed the Kyoto segment changed the atmosphere of the evening entirely. A senior police officer had been killed during an incursion in the Western District. The report was brief and used the careful language that official communications use when the specifics are difficult. Honored service, exceptional record. Gave his life in the service of public protection. The creature involved was consistent with the giant mutant rat strain. The officer had been attempting to evacuate civilians when the incursion reached him. The attached photograph in the report summary showed a face Lin recognized. The police captain. Lin read the report twice. He sat at his desk for a while after closing the terminal. He thought about the captain standing in the parking lot with a coffee, watching him walk away. He thought about the notebook and the patient, methodical questions, and the expression of a man who knew something was wrong but could not prove it. He thought about the fact that the captain had been in the Western District, which was not his usual assignment area, and the coincidence of that was the kind of thing you noticed when you had an adult mind processing children's circumstances. He went to the storage room he rented 3 floors below his family's apartment, and spent 3 hours running every pattern Coach Guo had shown him that week, pushing them past their instructed form into something harder, faster, more demanding. His body answered. The numbers rose. He was not mourning the captain in a way he could have explained. He was making a decision about what the man's death meant for his timeline. The world was accelerating. The cult was active and growing bolder. Intelligent creatures were organizing. Police officers with good minds were dying in the Western District on what might not have been routine assignments. And Lin Zichin was 12 years old, training in a storage room, eating expensive squid meat, and still considerably short of where he needed to be. He ran the forms again until his body told him to stop. Then he ran them once more after that. The martial arts room at Shanghai Middle School smelled of floor polish and accumulated effort, the particular residue of years of training pressed into walls and floor. Coach Guo ran it with the efficiency of someone who had spent 2 decades learning to separate talent from hard work, and who had grown quietly disappointed by how rarely the two arrived together. He stopped being disappointed by Lin very quickly. The first session, Coach Guo demonstrated a standard third form sequence, entry to deflection to throw to recovery. He explained the weight transfer. He showed the position of the trailing foot. Lin watched twice. Then he reproduced the sequence, alignment clean, breathing placed, weight moving exactly where the coach had indicated. The coach asked him to do it again. Lin did it again, slightly slower so the coach could check each position. The coach stepped back and looked at him with an expression he did not explain. He asked how long Lin had been training. Lin said he had always been active. By the third session, Coach Guo had stopped explaining fundamentals and started asking Lin to slow down. He moved Lin through third form, then fourth, then into material the senior members were still consolidating through repetition. Lin absorbed each sequence the same way. Watch once, attempt, adjust fractionally, hold. The coach began demonstrating techniques outside the curriculum, refinements he had arrived at through years of competition, small adjustments that separated functional execution from genuine precision. Lin integrated each one on the first attempt or the second. Coach Guo talked to himself more than he talked to Lin during those sessions. He would step back after a demonstration, watch Lin reproduce it, and murmur something low that was not quite addressed to anyone in the room. He was working through a conclusion he had not yet put into words. Lin could hear the murmurs from across the floor. The coach was arriving, carefully, at the idea that he was watching something he did not have a category for. The senior team was less philosophical about it. 3 members waited for Lin after his 4th session near the equipment room entrance. They were not openly hostile. They were doing the thing that people do when their established position has shifted without warning, and they want to establish that they have noticed. They suggested he had looked impressive, under coached conditions, implied that full-speed contact was a different matter, asked him to demonstrate the technique the coach had used him to illustrate. Lin demonstrated it at full speed. One of them stumbled backward. The second caught him by the shoulder, in the practiced way of someone making it look casual. The suggestion did not repeat. By the 6th week, a different kind of attention had organized itself around him. The school posted rankings publicly, academic scores on the corridor board, athletic records by the gymnasium entrance, competition results updated each term. Lin appeared in prominent positions across all of them, and this visibility produced a particular response from classmates who had previously been focused on each other. 2 girls from his class developed a habit of occupying the same sections of corridor he used after lunch. One had questions about the mathematics homework that required standing close enough to read from his notebook. Another asked him about the bus schedule on 3 separate occasions, the answer the same each time. He understood the dynamic and handled it with a pleasant vagueness that created no openings and no obvious offense. Shen Qinghan watched all of this from her usual position beside him. She said nothing for several weeks. Then one afternoon, she told him he should consider being friendlier. He asked what she meant by friendlier. She said he did not need to look through people when they were talking to him. He thought about this. He considered explaining that when people started conversations near the bus route board, his mind was generally running projections about guidebook completion timelines. He decided this would not help. He told her he would try. She gave him the look she used when she understood he was going to try and arrive approximately nowhere. Their relationship had developed its own language across 7 years, a shorthand built from shared experience and easy silence, and the accumulated weight of having been present for enough of each other's significant moments that neither needed to explain the references. She knew the voice he used when he was buying time. He knew the 3 versions of quiet she had, the one that meant she needed to talk, the one that meant she was working something through, and the one that simply meant she was tired. She knew when his attention was genuine and when it was a performance. He was not certain how much she had assembled from 7 years of close observation. He had been careful enough that there was nothing she could point to directly. He kept being careful. He kept being present. It was the most honest thing available to him. The money problem was the most straightforward version of the larger problem. He had run the calculations with the precision of someone who had been practicing compound interest arithmetic since age 4. Ghost Shadow squid meat at grade 2 quality cost more proportion than most of his classmates spent on entertainment in a month. The hostage reward, carefully conserved, covered 3 months of modest purchases. The guidebooks required far more than modest purchases. The abyssal giant butterfly sat below 15% completion. The giant mutant rat entry, supplemented by the corpse absorption at the police facility, had reached near 30. Filling even one entry to completion at current acquisition rates would take years. Years was not a number he found acceptable. Tournaments were the clearest solution. The martial arts team competed regionally 3 times per year, with prize structures in the upper divisions reaching figures that would actually move his resource calculations. He needed to be in those divisions. He needed to be winning in them, which was the smaller problem. The larger was doing so without producing results so anomalous that administrators started pulling his training records and asking questions. He calibrated his performance the way he calibrated everything else. The first regional qualifier came 4 weeks into term. Lin entered the intermediate bracket. He won his first 3 matches, demonstrating technical excellence and disciplined aggression, the portrait of a very well-coached talent. He won the 4th, slightly faster. Coach Guo watched the 4th match without his clipboard, which he normally used as something to do with his hands. The prize money went directly into the beast materials budget. He used it to purchase a second Ghost Shadow squid portion, better grade and fresher processing. He ate it that evening over plain rice and felt the guidebook advance before he had finished. He put his chopsticks down and recalculated. Still a long road, but now a road with a visible end. He picked his chopsticks back up. The squid was genuinely good. He had been too focused on the numbers to notice until that meal. He added it to the list of things worth acquiring when budget allowed. Rat God cult activity intensified through his first middle school term in a way that stopped looking like individual incidents and started looking like a campaign. The government's language escalated in its careful way: enhanced monitoring, coordinated protocols, additional provincial resources allocated. This was the vocabulary of officials managing something that had exceeded their initial containment projections. A northern province reported 3 simultaneous beast access events in a single night. Investigators noted evidence of gate opening, which required inside assistance, from someone who understood the perimeter well enough to know where the gap should be. The facilitators were gone before the response teams arrived. A broadcast Lin watched late one evening featured an academic who studied aberrant biology. The man was measured and deliberate, the tone of someone who had given a version of this talk before and understood it had not previously produced the urgency he intended. He described recent behavioral patterns in certain beast species, coordination outside the documented range, specific target selection, activity that suggested internal communication across individual animals. He did not use the word intelligence. The pause where the word should have been lasted exactly long enough for anyone listening carefully to fill it in themselves. Lin replayed the segment twice with the sound low. An organizing intelligence behind the cult activity. The Rat King. Not a symbolic title, but a description of something real that had accumulated enough awareness to plan, rather than simply hunt. He had suspected this from the moment he read the first cult research file. The academic segment confirmed the direction, without quite going all the way to the confirmation. He sat with the kidnapping attempt again, something he returned to periodically when new information suggested he might be missing part of the picture. 2 adults with a vehicle, waiting on a secondary street, on a Thursday afternoon when foot traffic was light. A child with no obvious value as a target, accompanied by an equally unremarkable classmate. He had never found a satisfying reason for why it had been them. Ordinary children did not attract that kind of organized effort. He thought about the biological trace he had sensed around Bai Shuer before she disappeared. He thought about the beast fang necklaces she had carried. He thought about the company that 3 elementary school children had briefly made, and whether that company had been observed by something patient enough to wait for a Thursday afternoon on a quiet street. He added it to the pile of questions with no current answers and let it sit. His body was advancing faster now than at any previous point. He had crossed out of the upper range of biological Tier 3 and entered the lower approaches of Tier 4. He could feel the difference the way a structure feels different once enough material has been added to its load-bearing elements, qualitatively changed, not just quantitatively. New capabilities were becoming accessible. His reaction time had passed figures he had seen documented for Grade 2 cyborg officers. His full sprint speed, released without calibration, would have broken national youth records by a margin that would have required retesting of timing equipment. He knew these numbers precisely. He knew them the way he knew his own heartbeat, because he tracked both. He did not allow any of it to show at levels that would create complications. Coach Guo placed him in the senior bracket by mid-term. The senior team received this with the reaction he had predicted. 2 members cooperative, 3 watchful, 1 who expressed disagreement through extra physical pressure during sparring. The disagreeable member had a structurally weak shoulder. Lin identified this in the first 10 minutes of the first session. On the third sparring exchange, he redirected a grab in a way that was technically an accident, and practically the logical endpoint of the shoulder weakness being exploited under live conditions. He helped the member off the mat with genuine expressions of concern. The member returned 2 weeks later and became cooperative. The team settled into a new hierarchy by the 8th week. They began staying late to work through sequences they had watched Lin execute during sessions. He trained every evening regardless, so their presence did not change his schedule, and the additional drilling was good for them. He marked it as a net neutral arrangement and gave it no further attention. Shen came to watch on a Thursday in the 7th week. She sat in the gallery above the training floor with a study book open on her lap, looking purposeful enough that no one questioned her presence. She watched for the full session. Walking home afterward, she said nothing for the first block. Then she told him that he did not train like someone who had always been active. He waited. She said he trained like someone who had been training since before she knew him. They had known each other since he was 3 years old. He acknowledged this observation without confirming or denying its implications. She told him she was not going to ask about it. He told her he appreciated that. The block after that was quiet in the way that has already said the important part. He thought about her in the storage room that night, running through the session's forms in the empty space. She had chosen not to push an unanswered question she had been carrying for some time. He understood what that cost her. He knew her attention well enough to know that unresolved questions were genuinely uncomfortable for her, that she would revisit them in the shower, and before sleep, and during quiet moments in class. The decision not to push was a deliberate choice made in his favor. He owed her something for that. He had not worked out the right shape of it. He ran the forms until his body said enough. Outside, beyond the storage room walls, the city was doing what it always did, moving, breathing, maintaining the ordinary surface over the dangerous things beneath. The news that morning had reported 2 more cult incidents in Western provinces. The academic from the evening broadcast had posted a follow-up comment online, brief, suggesting that his assessment in the segment had been the conservative version. Something was building. He had known it since the night he heard a news broadcast from a bassinet, and understood that the world he had been born into had teeth. He had spent 12 years preparing for the moment the teeth came closer, standing in the storage room in the dark, breathing steadily, his system tracking numbers that no one in this country could match with a body that had been growing for 12 years under conditions no one in this country knew about. He ran the calculation again. He was close. Not close enough yet, but the gap between where he was and where he needed to be was measurable now, and it was shrinking. He started again from the first form, pushing the pace past what the session required. The numbers moved. The guidebook crept forward by a fraction. Outside, the city's night sounds continued through the walls. Traffic, a distant siren, someone's window left open with music playing. Somewhere in the western provinces, something that had once been a human being was standing in the dark and making different calculations. The winter regional tournament came with heavier brackets and older competition. Lin entered the senior intermediate division and treated the opening rounds the same way he treated everything public. Calibrated, controlled, productive, without being inexplicable. He won his first 4 matches on technical superiority and timing, the kind of performance that read as excellent coaching and natural aptitude, rather than physical capability, that no training regimen could produce. The coach of the Nanjing team spent the 3rd match watching from the far end of the hall, with his arms crossed, evaluating. Lin clocked this without looking directly at him, and adjusted the 4th match's visible exertion upward slightly to confirm the impression of hard work rather than easy dominance. He won the division. Coach Guo said nothing during the return journey. He sat in the front of the transport with his clipboard on his knee and looked out the window. Near the final stop, he told Lin that he had been coaching for 19 years and that he was going to need some time to calibrate his thinking. Lin told him he appreciated everything the sessions had given him. The coach said something under his breath about that being exactly backward and left it there. The prize money pushed his beast materials budget into genuinely useful territory. He spent 2 weeks researching suppliers before committing. A licensed biological materials market 3 districts from home, operating under medical research exemptions, selling processed tissue from beasts culled by the city's defense contractors. The prices made his initial hostage reward look like pocket change. The quality was substantially better than anything the specialty market had stocked. He purchased abyssal giant butterfly material first, grade 3, harvested within 48 hours of the cull. The density was different from anything he had absorbed before, rich, complex, layered in a way that the simpler rat strain was not. The guidebook advanced more in 3 days of steady consumption than it had in the previous 3 months combined. He tracked the numbers precisely, cross-referencing against the cost per gram and projecting forward to completion. The Ghost Shadow Squid guidebook, receiving consistent attention since the first purchase, crossed 50%. 50% meant the system began delivering partial biological abilities from the squid's lineage. Nothing dramatic, nothing visible. A modest enhancement to his agility underwater, and a sensory improvement in low-light conditions. He tested the second one during a late-night training session in the storage room, with the lights extinguished and the door sealed. He could navigate the space with complete confidence. Not perfect vision, but something better than darkness. A reading of the room through a sense he did not have a word for, and the squid apparently had used for hunting in black water. He stood in the dark and thought about what completing the guidebook might provide. Then he went back to the forms. His body was approaching Tier 4. He could feel the threshold the way you feel a change in air pressure before weather arrives. Not yet upon him, but drawing close. The system's metrics clustering at the ceiling of his current rank, needing only the right accumulation of growth to tip over. He estimated 3 months at current progress rates, possibly less if he could afford more frequent high-quality material purchases. He needed another tournament. He also needed to sleep, which he did in the early hours of most mornings, the 4 hours his body had adapted to requiring. He had spent years testing the minimum and found it. 4 hours of genuine rest, taken early, with the remaining night available. He had arranged his routine around this, without telling anyone. His parents believed he was an exceptionally early riser who studied before school. He was, and he also trained in a storage room 2 floors below them for 2 hours before that. The compound effect of 12 years of this was the person who stood in a dark room with squid-derived senses, tracking the air currents from a ventilation grate, calculating how long it would take to become something this world actually had to reckon with. He was nearly there. The space between nearly and actually had been narrowing his entire life. Shen found him in the school library on a Wednesday afternoon, which was unremarkable. She found him staring at a single page for 11 minutes without turning it, which was not. She sat across from him and put her bag down and waited. He came back to himself and turned the page. She told him he had been somewhere else. He acknowledged this. She asked if he wanted to tell her where. He considered the full honest answer, which would have taken several hours and required disclosures that would change how she understood every memory they shared. He told her he had been thinking about how quickly things were changing. She looked at him with the specific attention she used when she understood he was giving her a partial truth and had decided not to push on it. She told him that whatever he was preparing for, he did not have to prepare for it alone. He looked at her across the library table. The afternoon light came through the high windows at an angle that caught the hairpin he had carved for her, which she wore almost every day, which he had noticed but not remarked on. She meant what she had said. She meant it with the uncomplicated sincerity of someone who had simply decided some years ago that his problems were also hers, without requiring any particular return on that investment. He told her he knew. It was the most accurate thing he had said to her in years that was also the complete truth. He did know. He had always known it, and had spent a long time being careful about what he let himself feel about it. Because caring about something in a world that contained giant rats and coordinated cult attacks and dead police captains was a specific kind of risk that he had not yet fully worked out how to carry. He picked up his pen and returned to the text. She opened her own book. They sat together in the library until the afternoon session ended, which was the most ordinary thing in his day and the one he valued most. The first sign that something was wrong in the Western District came through the school's local news terminal on a Thursday. A residential block on the outer ring had been evacuated overnight. Residents relocated to civic emergency housing. Official statement: infrastructure inspection, precautionary measure. The evacuation had taken 4 hours and involved the same response vehicles that handled beast incursion incidents. Infrastructure inspections did not typically require those vehicles. Lin read the statement twice, noted what it said and what it did not say, and pulled the district's incident history from the public record archive. 3 smaller events in the same quadrant over the previous 6 weeks. Each reported under different categories: a gas irregularity, a noise complaint investigation, a structural assessment flag, each requiring the same response vehicles, each closed without follow-up public report. The Western District outer ring was 3 kilometers from his school. He spent the lunch break building a map from public records, incident locations, response times, the type of containment equipment logged in each dispatch. The pattern that emerged was not random. The incidents formed a loose perimeter that had been closing incrementally toward a central point. Something was moving inward. The response teams were tracking it, containing each instance without pushing to the center, which meant either they had not yet identified the center, or they had identified it and were waiting for something before they moved. He had seen the police captain's approach to the kidnapping: patient, methodical, waiting for complete information before acting. The center of the pattern was a disused cold storage complex near the river. He had walked past it once in autumn, heading to the specialty market. It had looked like any other unused industrial building from the outside: secured, unglamorous, a chain across the loading dock entrance. He needed to visit it again, more carefully. He spent 3 days not visiting it, which required more self-control than the training sessions. The calculus was straightforward. The response teams were running a live operation. He was 12 years old with capabilities he could not explain to anyone. His presence inside an active cordon around a rat god cult site would create problems he could not solve and expose things he could not afford to expose. Whatever was in that building, the city's response infrastructure was already aware of it. He collected the available information instead. He traced supply routes, logged response team movements from public transit camera feeds accessible through the city's open data portal, and cross-referenced arrival times against the incident map. The operation was larger than the public statements suggested. He counted 6 distinct team rotations in the available data, which was 3 times what infrastructure inspection warranted. The cult had something in that building, something they were protecting or cultivating or waiting on. He thought about the academic who had described behavioral patterns in aberrant beasts: coordination, target selection, internal communication across individuals. He thought about the Rat King entry in his own system, sitting at partial completion, pulled from the residue in a police station parking lot. He thought about an organizing intelligence that had decided Shanghai was worth its attention. He thought about the Thursday afternoon on the quiet street, the vehicle with the open rear door, the specific selection of a secondary route that 2 particular children used. He pulled the incident map up again and measured the distance from the cold storage complex to the school: 2 kilometers. He measured the distance to his family's apartment block: 2.5. He sat with that geography for a long time. He had spent 12 years preparing for a world that was dangerous. He had calibrated every choice around the assumption that the danger was large and real, but also, for most of his childhood, abstract. Something happening to cities far away. Something reported by news anchors in the careful language of contained crises. The cold storage complex was 2 kilometers from where Shen Qinghan walked home every afternoon. He closed the data terminal and began making different kinds of calculations. He went to the beast materials market the following morning before school. He purchased the highest grade material in their current inventory without checking the price first, which he had never done before. He absorbed what he could during the lunch period, sequestered in the back row of the school library with his guidebook tracking open in his vision. The numbers moved significantly. The abyssal giant butterfly crossed 65%. His biological metrics shifted. The Tier 4 ceiling flexed. He needed it to break. He needed it to break soon. He attended the afternoon martial arts session with an intensity that caused 3 senior members to give him more space than usual. He ran the forms with full commitment, not the calibrated version, but the real one. and Coach Guo paused mid-instruction to watch him work. The coach said nothing until the session ended. Then he asked Lin privately whether something had happened. Lin said he had readjusted his training targets. The coach looked at him with the quiet concern of a person who has learned to read readjustments in the people he trains, who knows the difference between ambition and urgency. He told Lin his door was available. Lin thanked him and meant it, and walked to the storage room. He ran for 2 hours. He was standing in the corner, breathing hard for the first genuine time in months, his physical metrics sitting just below the Tier 4 boundary, when his perception caught something. A biological signature. Faint. At the edge of what the squid lineage enhancement could detect. From outside the building, from the general direction of the street. He moved to the narrow transom window and looked out at the level of the pavement. Normal street traffic. The ordinary Shanghai night. People. Vehicles. The orange-lit underside of moving air. Then one figure at the far end of the block, partially sheltered by a delivery awning. Standing in the way people stand when they are watching a specific building, rather than waiting for anything in particular. The biological signature was slightly wrong, in the same specific way Bai Shuer had been slightly wrong. Modified, layered, the trace of beast DNA, making the ordinary human smell into something that sat a few degrees off. The figure stood there for 90 seconds. Then it moved on. Lin stayed at the window without moving, not the police. The response teams smelled like machinery and standard augmentation, not a civilian. This was the specific biological offset he had learned to recognize and now understood the name of. Rat God Cult. Close enough to stand outside his building and take their time about it. He stood in the dark of the storage room and felt the Tier 4 threshold press against his metrics like a door from the inside. He was very nearly there. Very nearly something this world would need to take seriously. He had a day, perhaps 2, of accumulated training and absorbed essence between himself and that threshold. He had spent 12 years being careful about not being seen. The figure outside had already seen something. He moved away from the window and returned to the center of the room and started again from the first form, every muscle engaged, the numbers climbing in his vision. The squid-derived senses tracked the building around him, and the street beyond it, and the city beyond that, moving in the dark with all its ordinary and dangerous life. Outside on the street, a long way from the cold storage complex and 3 train stops from the markets where beast materials changed hands. The city that had been his training ground his entire life was running out of distance between itself and what was coming. Lin Zichin ran the forms until his body crossed the line it had been approaching for 12 years. The notification arrived without ceremony. Biological Tier 4. His system logged the advancement. His metrics rewrote themselves on a higher scale. He stood still in the storage room and felt his own body, as though for the first time, encountering its actual dimensions. The way a room feels different once the lights properly come on. He breathed. He closed his eyes. He ran the final form one more time. He was going to need every bit of this, soon.